I've got something of a quick fire round for you today, packed with insights. Here are 10 definitions of wisdom and personal development terms, including what is wisdom, what is confidence, genius, body wisdom, emotional mastery, the integral success principle, and a couple of others as well. Let's tuck in. So here we go then, 10 wisdom definitions, starting with confidence. Confidence is the ability to confide in yourself, and therefore it's the same thing as self-honesty. You're being honest with yourself about what's true. And one of the things that you might be being honest with yourself about is that you can't do a certain thing, at least not in the now moment. And so that is confiding, that's confidence, because you have self-honesty. So confidence has nothing to do with competence or your ability to achieve any goal or task. So what might stop us from being confident? Well, self-judgements. These prevent the self-honesty and the confiding. So the way to achieve confidence from lack of confidence is to release all the self-judgments that have built up over the years, all the self-judgments and self-constrictions. That returns us to a place of confidence. True education is about much more than the conventional understanding of education, which is primarily based around academic achievement. It's much more about your potential and wider nuances of life. And the etymology of the word education even backs this up. It comes from the Latin educo, meaning to lead out or to draw out, as in your potential, which is why Heraclitus said that education is not the filling of a bucket, but the lighting of a fire. The lighting of the fire of your potential beneath you, which is what education is supposed to be, if we understand it properly. So it's all about your potential and being true to yourself, and how can you get that potential out of yourself. And education is about liberating that, basically. Genius is the absence of second-guessing yourself, and therefore it's a phenomenon that's available to all of us all of the time. If we were to be able to take a split second and stretch it so that we could see what's really going on, what you have is a situation where you would get some insights or some awareness, something like that. And before you even know it, some logical aspects of the brain have come in, and they involve self-judgment and self-doubt. And so they've inhibited your ability for that genius to come through before you've even realized what's happened. Emotional and psychological stress happens the same way that physical structural stress happens. If you remember back to these shatterproof rulers that we had back in the day, we used to put them over the edges of the desks and then smash down on them, and they would shatter. But the reason they shatter is because there's two forces acting upon them. You've got the first force holding the ruler in place, and then you've got the second force coming down on it, which creates a point of stress, which is here. If I didn't hold it in place, there'd only be one force acting down on it, and it would just flip round and there'd be no stress. So the way to avoid stress is to avoid a second force acting upon us. And in the case of emotions and psychology, that force, that effect, is self-judgment and self-constriction. And so we just need to remove those. Emotional infinity is a kissing consciousness term that means emotional freedom. And the reason it's said that way is because it represents awareness of the fact that once we have genuine emotional freedom, then we have an infinite freedom and fearlessness when it comes to facing any emotion or feeling. And whether we think of feelings being in the mind and emotions in the body, or vice versa, there's essentially only two places they can arise, and that's in the mind and in the body. And so once we have an awareness that we're going to allow our body to respond to them however it wants to, and also allow our mind to be whatever happens in the mind, whatever content arises there, then we have an awareness that we have no resistance to any feeling or emotion ever. We have no anxiety to them, because we can allow them to pass through ourselves however they wish to do so. Wisdom is defined as the capacity to understand emptiness, and it's best understood with the principle of logic, that between subject and object. In logic, a subject is defined as that which is aware of an object. So if we get an object, such as a pen, then I am the subject relating to that object. So subject, object. If it was you were looking at the pen, then you'd be the subject. And actually, frankly, from your perspective, you could also think of me as an object. It's that relational aspect between the two. When you take this on a bit further, you can recognize that things like your body, your own body, is an object to your awareness as well. In fact, even your thoughts are. How do you know you have a thought ever? Because you're aware of your thoughts. So there's a difference between your thoughts and your awareness. So once you can do that, you can take a subjective perspective on your entire empirical self, your mind and your body. And so this is the manifest world of physical things and also intangible things like concepts, but which have form, are known as the world of form. And the absence of any kind of form whatsoever is emptiness. So this comes back to the same thing. When you can disidentify with your empirical self, your mind and your body, then you can know your true identity is prior to identification with objects. Hence the fact that wisdom is the capacity to understand emptiness. Now, it's probably helpful at this point to suggest that wisdom or enlightenment isn't about completely disidentifying with your manifest self, your body-mind self, and just ignoring that and just disidentifying the whole time. The whole point of the perspective is that it's a halfway stage that you can come back in, and then you can run your life through your ego, your part of the part of you that actually is capable of functioning in this world. You can do that much more effectively. So you can gain some freedom of perspective, but then re-engage in your human self, we could put it that way, much more effectively without being attached to any kind of notions or concepts or identities that you feel you would otherwise feel constricted by. Now, there's also another definition of what is referred to as vertical enlightenment, which isn't an official term, whatever the heck that means, but it does go hand in hand with this understanding of horizontal enlightenment, or what we think of as regular enlightenment or wisdom. So the way to understand that is to think about, let's say you have an experience of disidentifying with your mind and your body, your empirical self. So this is that old saying, I am not the mind is in me. I am not even the body is in me. So there's a difference between you and your mind and your body. That's all well and good, but so if we consider that to be horizontal enlightenment, what you have then is the interpretation of that experience will be interpreted according to your worldview. So if we take a simple model like the line of compassion or care, which goes up through egocentric, ethnocentric, and world-centric stages, we can see that a person who's egocentric, who experiences disidentification with the manifest world and their manifest identity, will interpret that as perhaps being that they're the second coming of Christ or something like that. Or I've heard also that apparently for some reason when women do this, they think they're Queen Elizabeth. An ethnocentric person will also experience that in a different way, but in that sense they might even go as far as to use tanks and guns and bombs against people from other ethnicities and take the experience they've had of disidentification with the manifest world as justification for that violence, because they see it as something that endorses it, because they're interpreting it through their ethnocentric worldview. So then there's another stage of depth, which is world-centric, which is ideally where the world needs to be, really, if it's going to solve its problems. So you're identifying your experience, or you're interpreting your experience of disidentification with your empirical self and the manifest world from a world-centric perspective, which is a totally different thing. So we can think about that as vertical enlightenment. My friend hates the phrase, I love it, I think it's very useful. But either way, there it is. So what is shadow, or the shadow? Well, this is a term that relates to the Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung, and it's essentially about the unconscious bag into which we metaphorically put all of the aspects of our personality that are unacceptable to the people around us. And more often than not, this relates to young childhood, or when we're growing up, and experiences with parents, teachers, peer groups, all these kind of things. Any time where we would have displayed an aspect of our personality and had a dangerous or dismissive reaction from the people around us. If it was strong enough, we would have our psychology would have buried that into the shadow, into the unconscious, and we kind of cut off that part of our true personality, our true self, because it's too dangerous to show that to the people around us. And to the extent that we do that, then what's left is partial false self in place of our true self. So this is why people do shadow work, is that they're touching back into that unconscious material so they can reclaim all that gold, all the great parts of their personality and their abilities, get their optimum psychology, so they can effectively live the life that they want to do. And this is what kissing consciousness does. At a very serious level, you might have shadow material that's so serious you need to go and see a psychotherapist or something like that. At a milder level, though, it might be something to do with perhaps shyness about asking somebody out on a date, or mild unconscious motives around diet and eating, or perhaps public speaking, anything like that, issues people have with money. And so this is primarily what kissing consciousness does, is to move the shadow from unconscious to conscious, to move from fear consciousness to love consciousness in all of the aspects that we want to be effective. So if we look at a kissing consciousness binary table, which is how we understand the world and particularly ourselves, you've got the table with love consciousness and fear consciousness there, you can see, and you've got, on the one hand, you've got self-allowance and self-acceptance, so you're in your yes permission, as we call it, and then on the other hand, you've got self-constriction, perhaps with some self-judgment as well, and that's essentially you're in a no permission, so the permission to be you has been shut down. And this concept of the shadow is also very useful to understand in conjunction with the previous two items that we looked at, enlightenment, or what I called horizontal enlightenment, and vertical enlightenment, because these three with the shadow become waking up, growing up, and cleaning up, where the regular notion of wisdom or enlightenment, or what I called horizontal enlightenment, is considered to be waking up. Growing into further stages of development is considered perhaps to be vertical enlightenment, that's growing up, and then doing the shadow work is cleaning up. And this also helps you to understand how you can have situations where you have, say, a spiritual teacher who is very convincing, and yet it turns out they have NPD, they're narcissists, or they have narcissistic personality disorder or something like that, or perhaps they just don't care about people more world-centrically. And one of the reasons they're very convincing is because that even though they're narcissists, they have had genuine experiences of waking up. So they're talking from a place of certain authority. They just happen to have not grown up and not done their shadow work. And usually the two go hand in hand, particularly if something has caused somebody to be overly egocentric when they're an adult, then they perhaps will be inhibited from developing through stages as we'd hope an adult normally would be. So there you go. Waking up, growing up, and cleaning up. Very useful insight. Body wisdom, as David Hurd taught it to me, is the art of listening to the body. And in that, you're paying attention to the feedback that's being provided, or listening to all the signals, reading the runes of your own body, in the same way that a car mechanic would pay attention to the engine and the other parts to get a feel for what's going on. And the wisdom really kicks in when we realize that the body wisdom needs to be protected from the tyrant part of the mind, because the needs of the mind are not the same thing as the needs of the body. If you have a need for something like food, and the need is in the mind, you can't satisfy that need with food. And So once we commit to this practice of learning to listen to the body day after day, week after week, year after year, it's actually going to take you someplace incredible, because it's going to enhance your ability to pay attention and respond to your body's needs for much greater health and longevity. Success is the achievement of goals that are truly and genuinely important to you. But what are goals? Well, you probably think of them in terms of long-term, large-scale goals, such as earning enough money to buy a house, starting a relationship, or getting your body in shape. And actually, there are hundreds of goals that we don't think about, such as you want to attend that event at the weekend, or finish an article in time to do something else. But if you think about it, every moment is a goal in terms of whether you're being true to yourself or not. Furthermore, those long-term future goals can only ever be achieved by a series of moments of being true to yourself. So success isn't something that you find, it's something that you are. And we achieve that automatically when we allow ourselves and receive ourselves. And as always, the thing that gets in the way of that is self-judgment and self-constriction. The integral success principle states that the more truths you include in your approach to any given situation, the greater your chances of success. So if we take the example of a sports team, they need to think about defense as well as attack. They need to think about tactics as well as physical fitness. They need to think about mental fitness as well as physical fitness. They need to consider teamwork, but also consider individual brilliance. And they need to think about pre-planned strategy as well as intuitive actions on the field. All of these things are factors. And so you can apply this to anything that you want to achieve, whether it's in dating and relationships, or whether it's getting your body in shape, or even finding a job or a career that works for you. All you simply do is apply this principle and work out what are the factors that are relevant and address as many as you can. And I'm sure I'll talk about this at some point, do an expansion video where I'll go into this in a lot more detail. And now that you have all those definitions in place, I'd like to show you something particularly cool, which the kissing consciousness binary of love consciousness and fear consciousness helps to explain, because we can see that all of these, or most of these qualities, not all of them, but most of these qualities of confidence, success, positive thinking, being true to yourself, genius, emotional capacity, are all the same thing looked at through a different angle, through a different lens. But they're essentially the same thing. They're all essentially love consciousness. And the opposite of those is essentially all different perspectives, different ways of looking at fear consciousness. So ultimately, though, we're talking about two different states of being, and the qualities are essentially all wrapped up together. So if we look at confidence versus lack of confidence, you can see that because confidence is confiding in yourself, then self-judgment, self-constriction prevents that. And so in love consciousness, you have confidence, and in fear consciousness, you have lack of confidence. The same with success. If you're operating under self-judgment or self-constriction, you're not being true to yourself. So success isn't really success, it's actually frustration instead. And then also, if you're in allowance of yourself, you're going to have that emotional capacity. You're going to be in allowance of your emotions. And when that's shut down, that is also the opposite. That's fear consciousness. So again, we're looking at the same thing through different perspectives. And we can do the same with genius as well. So again, genius being the absence of second guessing yourself, but the opposite, lack of genius, is caused when people do second guess themselves. And of course, self-judgment, self-constriction is what causes people to doubt their first instincts. And positive thinking is another. In kissing consciousness, we actually call it positive not thinking, because the opposite of negative thinking is very different. It's not, with negative thinking, there's a lot of thinking going on, but with positive thinking, there isn't any thinking going on at all, really. You just have the impulse between desire and action. And so this is why we call it positive not thinking. But again, this also fits under the same two categories of love consciousness and fear consciousness, because under the one you have positive not thinking, and under the other you have negative thinking caused by self-judgment and self-constriction. So again, we're always looking at the same two qualities here from different perspectives. It just so happens that wisdom and things like vertical enlightenment, growing up and such like, they're a slightly different thing. So essentially what we're talking about here is the shadow between conscious and unconscious, authentic and not authentic. To help you develop these ideas and understandings further, I have something for you. If you'd like, you can get the first 2 chapters of the Kissing Consciousness Handbook absolutely free. And that's going to start to build up your understanding of these 2 qualities. The first chapter deals with the love consciousness and fear consciousness, between simplicity and stupidity. So that's a really handy one to have an understanding of. And then chapter 2 will go into the power of love and explain different types of love and how we get to the point of using these 2 definitions of love consciousness and fear consciousness. So as I say, you can get that for free if you go to kissingconsciousness.com/chapters, and I'll be putting a link for that. You can see the link down there below in the description. And if you're interested in one-to-one support with me, that's also possible. You can discuss that with me at kissingconsciousness.com/coaching. And if this video has helped you, please subscribe and I'll help you again. Have a good time till next time.